Hi everybody, it's Christopher and welcome to Life's Not Over, It Just Looks Different on YouTube. If you've been watching some of my videos before, or if you've read my book that shares a name with this channel, you know that I have a condition called hydrocephalus, or water on the brain, which means I have a little shunt that goes from my head to my chest to drain away excess CSF fluid because my body's overproducing it and the brain can't absorb it fast enough. So they drain away the excess, putting it in another part of the body where the body can absorb it, and all is well. I was born with the condition, so my first shunt went in when I was 3 months old, and at that time they put in what they called a VA shunt, which meant that it went and drained into my heart. So I was going in for surgeries pretty much on an annual basis as I grew, so that they could lengthen the catheter going into the heart and keep things flowing nicely. That was until about 1980, when I was about 8 years old. I had an accident and was rushed to the hospital because there was damage to the shunt. And while they were in there, the surgeon decided that the VA shunt was no longer the way to go. He changed it to a VP shunt, which meant it now drained into my abdomen, and it was just kind of left there moving around freely within the abdominal cavity. He put in what the doctor, I remember him telling me, even though I was just a young boy at the time, he said, I put in some extra catheter for you so you can grow into it. And that seemed to work really well. In fact, it worked so well that I didn't have to go in for another shunt operation for more than 20 years, which I'll talk about in a minute. But because I hadn't gone in for a shunt operation in so long, and I didn't have any incidents, so there was no need, it didn't seem to block on its own, I was living a happy life, and this thing was just in my body and doing its job. But in 1989, so 9 years after that surgery, I went to my family doctor and I thought, I've had this in here for an awfully long time and I've never really had it checked or monitored. Should we do that? And the doctor agreed. So he sent me to a neurosurgeon who did the usual tests, a CT scan and some other tests to check the function of the shunt. We sat down, we reviewed the tests, and he told me at that time that as far as he could tell, everything was fine. There didn't appear to be any blockage. And he said that I probably didn't even need the shunt anymore, but that was going to be an unnecessary surgery. And so he felt it was fine just to leave it in there, even if my body didn't really need it, and I could just go on with my life. So, okay, great. And that continued on for another number of years. I had no problems. There was no indication that there was anything wrong. Everything was fine until 2001. And so now I was a fully grown adult, and it had been a long time since I'd had that last surgery as an 8-year-old child. And when I was first experiencing problems with the shunt, I didn't really know. I wasn't 100% sure. I just knew that I felt really ill. My stomach was bad, my headache, I had a horrible headache, and I just didn't feel right, and I was having trouble. So I thought, well, I'm going to go to the hospital and get this checked out. And I went to a hospital, told them that I thought it was a shunt problem. They did their tests and said, we can't really see any evidence to shunt problems, probably just a really bad headache, maybe a migraine. So they said, take some pain meds, go home. And that's where we left it. But the pain didn't go away. So after waiting a couple of days, I went back to the hospital, was seen by a different doctor who tested the shunt and said, you're right, it's not working. We're going to get you in for surgery. Because it wasn't an acute emergency, they didn't take me in right away. They let me wait a few days until they had an available OR and were able to go in and do the operation, which they did. I remember they did it on a Thursday. I woke up from the surgery, felt absolutely fantastic, which was surprising other than having, stitches in my head and stitches in my body. I felt pretty good. And they kept me for an extra day for observation. Then I went home, talked to my boss about coming back to work, and he said, no, why don't you just sort of wait and recover a little bit before you come back to work? So instead of going back to work on the following Monday, I went back on Tuesday. But I felt really good. I had the staples still in my head. I had staples in my body, and there was going to be a few more days before they took those out. But I was able to go back to work and function and do all of those things, and life was good again. Fast forward a little bit to 2003, and I was starting to have some really bad abdominal pain that I didn't know what was happening and why, and it was kind of doubling me over and making me feel really sore. So I went and got it checked out. The surgeon said, I think it's your shunt. He sent me to the neurosurgeon. The neurosurgeon said, nope, it's not your shunt. Sent me back to the surgeon for further investigation. And the two of them kind of ping-ponged me for about 2 years until there was finally evidence on one of the scans that the neurosurgeon said, oh yeah, I can see it now. The shunt in your abdomen is irritating your liver. So he said, we're going to move that. So I said, okay, great, let's do that. So we made plans for an elective surgery, basically, because there was no acute problem happening at the time other than this pain. So we made plans to do the surgery, and just before that, I had a pre-op appointment with the neurosurgeon to talk about it, and he asked me how I was feeling, and I said, I've got a bit of a headache, but I don't know what it is yet. I don't know how bad the headache is. And we didn't get into it further from there. I didn't explain more and he didn't ask more. So we just kind of left it. And a couple of days later, I still had the headache, but it got a whole lot worse. And it was really starting to cause me a lot more problems. So my spouse took me to the hospital where I was taken in, and yes, it was clear that the shunt wasn't working. So I was going to go in for a shunt revision at that time. So this was ahead of the scheduled date to move the shunt anyway. Here I was back in the hospital because now it was blocked and damaged and needed to be changed. They did that, and it blocked again after they changed it. So I was back in for another surgery within 24 hours and had a second operation. And that's when it all went wrong. Because when I woke up from that surgery, all I could see was light and shadow. That's when we all kind of learned that something had gone really wrong, and it had affected my vision. When they did some tests, they found out that the blood supply to the part of my brain that processes eyesight had been cut off by the buildup of fluid. And now that the fluid had been, the pressure had been released, and I was able to feel well again, sort of, they said, we'll give us some time. You'll probably get some of your sight back. We don't know how much yet, but let's just wait and see how this goes. So that was in 2005, and that's what led to the writing of the book, and that's been my life ever since. I had another shunt surgery in 2013, and if you watched my video about finding the fun in the operating room, you know that I was sort of able to joke about it, even though I was kind of nervous about going in for surgery and having another shunt revision after having lost my vision. I was able to find some fun in it, and because that's what I do. So, I had that surgery, everything was fine, and I was good. Turns out that time, according to the surgeon, the shunt had blocked, and instead of changing it or replacing it, or whatever, he said he just flushed it through, cleared the blockage, and basically left it all intact. What was interesting about that hospital stay was they did their initial tests and their x-rays and their CT scan and whatnot, and the doctor came to see me, and he's like, why do you have extra parts for your shunt? And I was like, oh, well, let me catch you up. Because in one of the previous shunt operations when I was a kid, they had originally put the shunt in behind my ear. But it blocked, and they went to change it, and they couldn't take it away from my brain. It had fused to the brain. So they put in a new one up a little closer to the top of my head. So now I have two shunt reservoirs under my scalp, and that showed up on the x-ray. Of course, this doctor in Calgary had never met me before, didn't know that history, so he came to ask about it. He's like, oh, okay, well, that's good. And then his next question was, well, why does it go into your pleural cavity near your lung? And I said, well, that happened in 2005 because it was irritating my liver. So they moved it from there, and they put it up near my lung where there's a little space where the fluid can drain and absorb in the body and everything's fine. And he was really bothered by that. He was like, wow, I don't like that it's there. He says, I think I'm going to move it. But he told me afterwards that he had gone in and just sort of flushed everything out and left it as is. And he didn't decide to move it and put it back. He was going to put it back in the abdominal cavity, but decided not to do that. Fast forward again a little bit to 2016, and I was back in for another shunt revision because I was feeling ill and feeling really sick to my stomach. I had a headache, something was wrong. So went in, and it turned out that yes, I needed another shunt revision because upon investigation, the surgeon told me that the two pieces, the catheter that drains down to toward my lung and the reservoir itself had come apart. So they had to sort of put those pieces back together and put me back together again. He too, different surgeon than the one in 2013, the surgeon in 2016 was also bothered by the fact that it was draining into this space near my lung. So it's been a really interesting journey to know sort of and see what the doctors like and don't like and how they react to these different shunt revisions I've had and the changes that I've had because of it. It's been kind of an interesting experience for me, and at this point it kind of makes me chuckle anytime I talk to a surgeon and they start talking about why it's there and how they don't really like the fact that it's there. Just kind of makes me chuckle. One other part that's been kind of interesting for me over the years is just the people that I've met that are surprised when they find out A, that I have hydrocephalus, and B, that I'm alive. I don't think it's all that unusual. I mean, I've done a lot of reading online, and I've read about many people who are adults. I don't actually know anybody else personally who has hydrocephalus. Actually, that's not 100% true. I did meet one lady at a book signing at a bookstore who came up to my table, asked me what the book was about. She said that she had also gone through a number of surgeries and she had this condition that nobody had ever heard of. And I said, well, I have a condition called hydrocephalus. And so that's what led to the sight loss, and that's what led to the writing of the book. And she's like, that's the condition I have. So then we had this like great new connection that our conversation changed, and we had a very different conversation after we sort of realized that we had the same thing. That was a one-off meeting. I've never seen that lady again, but I hope she's doing well wherever she is. She's probably the only person that I've ever actually met with hydrocephalus, although through reading online, there's many more out there, and also on a Facebook group that I'm part of, there's even more out there. So yes, we do live productive lives and can do things, and we just have this condition that rears its ugly head sometimes. I know some people struggle more with headaches and other sort of conditions that go with the hydrocephalus. So in that regard, I know that I've been pretty lucky with the way my hydrocephalus has played out, except for the 15 revisions that I've had to go through in my lifetime and the sight loss. If it wasn't for the sight loss, everything was wonderful. But here I am, and this is my path. But it still has been interesting to me that in the last 5 years, I met a lady who had moved to Canada from Africa, who had gone to medical school over in Africa. And when I told her that I had hydrocephalus, she kind of had this stunned and shocked look on her face. And when I asked her about it, she said that all of her teachings told her that babies with hydrocephalus die. Well, here I am, not dead. So that was an interesting experience. And then a couple of years later, I was taking a tour of the Alberta Children's Hospital here in Calgary, and I met one of the surgeons there. And when I told him that I had hydrocephalus, he also looked at me kind of surprised, but he was less shocked that I was alive and just thought that it was really great that I was still here and able to tell about it, and seemed like a very functional adult with hydrocephalus. Seeing other people's reactions to finding out that I have hydrocephalus and being able to have conversations about it, not just with the doctors, but also with other people that I've met. Kind of few and far between that I've met anybody else with hydrocephalus, but it's been a really interesting experience, and honestly, one that I wouldn't trade for the world. I've had a great life, and I plan to continue living and doing everything that I do, and I don't know when my next shunt revision will be. I don't know what else will happen, but I'm just going to go with it and keep having fun, because if you've been watching my videos, you know that I'm on this planet for fun. And that's the way I'm going to be. That is everything I wanted to share in today's video. I want to thank you very much for watching. I really do appreciate each and every one of you who watches these videos. To all of you who have subscribed to the channel, thank you so much for doing so. I really do appreciate it. And I hope that you have a wonderful day.